Morning. Those of you who haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Killian, and I'm the RUF campus minister here, the college campus minister for Oklahoma State. And Jonathan, our pastor, had kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He's something of a movie fan, you could call it that if you wanted to. And he had a chance to go to kind of like the mecca of movie fandom this weekend, and I'm really thankful that he had that opportunity. But for you, I'm sorry that he is not with us this morning, and that he has to kind of put up with me. And I realized when I told Jonathan, sure, I'll do that. And I said, so what's our next series again? He's like, it's going to be 1st and 2nd Samuel. I was like, oh, that's great, yeah. And I said, I love the way Judges kind of sets that up and kind of gets ready. And I was kind of thinking, I said, I'll kind of set that up a little bit and look at the end of Judges and kind of think about it. And he's like, great, that'd be great. I really appreciate it. And then I went back and looked at the end of Judges after I said I'd do that. And I was like, this was a huge mistake. But this morning, I do pray that you will bear with me, especially coming off of a Cowboy win. You know, which was great. We got a Cowboy win this morning. I'm sorry. But we, starting the season off and starting those things off, and I know it's a good day. It's Labor Day, there's a lot of folks traveling. But this morning, again, when I went back to look at the end of Judges, and just how chaotic and how dark and how hopeless in so many ways the situation is, we're going to have to slog through that a little bit today. I want to tell you on the front end, there's a happy ending-ish to this story. And I also want to give, this is a relatively serious disclaimer, there are things that happen in these chapters that are brutal. That's the only way to describe it. And they're not childish. And so please consider that in your parenting. I'll try to consider that in my preaching. But please do understand that. So we're going to go through some of that, but there is hope. And there is kind of a happier ending to the story in some senses. And hopefully your soul today, as we go through some of this, will be longing for and looking for the hope and the happy ending. And that's what we're in. So Judges, we're going to be, actually the bulletin says 20 through 12. I'm not sure how that would work. Can't possibly do that. So what we're actually going to do is look at little pieces of 19, 20, and 21. I'm only going to read a very brief amount, but I want you to hear this refrain, and then we'll focus on chapter 20 and 21. But listen to this. This is the beginning of 21, the beginning of 18, and the end of 21. You can follow along if you like. And in those days, there was no king in Israel. And in those days, the tribe of the people of Dan were seeking for itself an inheritance to dwell in. For until then, no inheritance among the tribes of Israel had fallen to them. And in the beginning of 19. In those days, when there was no king in Israel, a certain Levite was sojourning in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, who took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. And then, if you'll look with me, the 21, 25. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Pray with me. Lord Jesus, you are our King. We forget that. We forget that you are the King of this world, that you're the King of our lives, and you are a good King. Lord, you do not give us all of your authority, and you do not give us all of your power, and you do not give us even all of your wisdom and your knowledge, but you reveal so much. And more than that, instead of giving us and standing from afar instruction, you are the good King who comes to rule every piece of our life and be involved and fight yourself. Today, Jesus, I pray that we would see that even in this pain and this chaos, and that we would hope and look to you, our good King, but more know that you are here and that you are present, and that we would bow the knee and that we would rejoice in being your children and your subjects. That's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. One of my many faults is that I am not very politically interested. It's not that I lack the ability to read, and it's not even that I lack a certain amount of political curiosity, but it's somewhere along the lines in engaging in political things and reading the news, and my dad always watched the news, and somewhere along the line I grew pretty despondent. and probably more cynical than I should about political things. And in that sense, I haven't paid too much attention to something that is actually very close and very important to us who are people in this nation. And it's probably important to those around the world, and that is the situation in Syria. I don't know if you know about it. I don't know if you have looked at it. Maybe you're like me and you're a little bit cynical and you're kind of like, I'm not that interested. Whatever happens over there happens over there. I don't know if there's anything to be done. But when you look at this situation, here's just something I would encourage. I did read a little bit. I kind of began to kind of pursue it. And what I realized about this situation, like so many situations that cause conflict, that cause war, that we become entangled in, or that we are already a part of, it's more complicated than I thought. It's much more complicated. I thought maybe that's why I stayed away from it. There are things that we don't understand. There are things we don't control. There is problems in Syria. There are problems with the people there. There are problems with the rulers there. There are problems with the history there. And when you look at it, it's really actually hard to even get your mind around and to begin to understand it. And it's certainly even more difficult to begin to know what to do, or maybe even how to feel. As children are hurt, as people are killed, that seems to be pretty clear. That's bad, that's wrong. There is evil, there is good, there is right, there is wrong, but getting at it, seeing it, and how to promote it, or even engage it, is very hard. And it's almost depressing. And it's almost enough to paralyze us and make us fearful. The end of Judges is a lot like that situation. The people of God have been called to go into a land, and what they're actually supposed to do is prefigure the beautiful restoration and perfection of a world upheld and restored by God their King. The promised land. That's where they should have been. They should have gone into this land, and it was a land that, and again, I know that it's more complicated than this, and I will talk about that. But they were supposed to go into a land where there was evil, and instead of the evil, push all the evil out and become the good. And become that was right. And they were told to do that, and they were given instructions on how to do that, and the king was leading them, their great king, the Lord. And the book of Judges is a series, a descending series, down, 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 of leaders raised up and leaders failing. And the situation, the people of Israel becoming more and more and more less part of that which is good and right and true. And descending into an evil and a brokenness and a confusion and a chaos that is crippling. It's literally crippling. And in 18, 19, and 20, this is in some senses the author's last attempt to make us realize how far the darkness has gone. How far it's spread and where it is. Because unlike the situation in Syria, where do you know what I do with that? Gosh, that's complicated and dark, and I heard about it. But then you know what I do? I go to my house. And I go to Cowboy football games. Because there's no gas there. And people aren't dying. It's over there. Here's the problem with Judges. It comes home to roost. The evil and the darkness and the chaos and the brokenness and the confusion and the complication is not out there. It is within the people of God. It is in their nation. It is in their homes. It is in their lives. And it has come home to roost. And they have to look at it. You know, there's a funny line in that Hoosiers movie. I don't know if anybody's even seen Hoosiers anymore. It's old. It's a basketball movie. It's really good. There's this line where he says, there's a difference between a man kind of, stripping down and making a ruckus and howling at the moon and doing that outside, and then someone doing that in your living room. He says one is kind of weird. You think, oh well, but the other one you kind of have to deal with. Well, we're going to have to deal with some of this today. We're going to have to deal with the chaos and the pain and the confusion and where Israel is. And sadly, I want us, hopefully, to understand that the brokenness and complication of Syria is not just there. It is also here, that it's in our churches, and that we face chaos as well. We're going to look at three things. We're going to look at the complicated chaos, a confused response, and then a call out of that chaos for a good king. Those are kind of the three things that we're going to look for. And the first, I have already begun to allude to, and that is this: the Canaanization of Israel. That sounds strange, the Canaanization. Basically, it just means Israel's loss of light and it progressively becoming a nation that is engulfed in darkness. They were supposed to be light, the children of God. They're supposed to light up that promised land and take possession so that it can flourish, and so that they can flourish, and so that there will be peace, and that the great King and His glory would be exalted and seen. They were the light of the world. And instead, what happened is little by little, piece by piece, failure by failure, sin by sin, they actually began to go toward and embrace and intermarry with and eventually become part, and not of the cure, but of the darkness. Until it's almost impossible to see the difference. And this comes to light in one very explicit, one very painful scene. If you could think of badness in the Old Testament, okay, particularly in Genesis, right? What's something that happened that you're like, I mean, there's not too many times that God literally rained down fire from heaven. There's a few. Can you remember what one of those times were? A place called Sodom, Gomorrah. Remember that? When God literally rained down fire and destroyed a town. Do you remember what happened? It was like an apex of awful. There was a scene, and again, I'll try to be delicate here, but where there were people, holy people, in a house. And the people of Sodom and Gomorrah surrounded the house and demanded that the goodness within the house and the joy and the light that was there be brought out to them so that they could abuse and destroy and misuse and hurt and rob any goodness from it. And instead make it part of their darkness. And there couldn't be found anyone who was standing against them. And so the people had to leave. The goodness had to leave. It was unprotected. It was not okay. And instead, the Lord destroyed that place utterly. In Judges, a very, very hard scene happens in 19. It is told again in 20. And the way I'll say it is this. The same scene happens. Almost exactly. It is very intentional the way the author writes it. I don't want to read both accounts because they're too brutal. But it is exactly, word for word, the same Hebrew words are used in the same order, in lines, so that what you basically see is this happened again. The same thing. There was goodness and there was innocence to be protected. And it wasn't some Canaanite, Sodom, Gomorrah city. It wasn't the not people of God. It wasn't the people who didn't know God. But this time, the people of God, in a city where there was the people of God, and in a place where it should have been good, it was them that surrounded the house. And it was them that demanded that the goodness that was on the inside of the house and that was happening be dissipated, and that they would be taken out. And they would abuse, and they would harm, and they would destroy. And it took the form, this time, of a woman, a young woman, that was cast out, that was demanded as an abusive sacrifice for the evil and the darkness that was in that city. And that city was Gibeon. It was part of the nation of Israel, and it was part of the tribe of Benjamin. This was not some pagan city. In fact, the author says that the travelers who this happened to skipped what they would consider a Canaanite city, kind of a pagan city. Don't sleep there because we might get in trouble. Let's go till we find our own people. Let's go till we find the religious people, the people of God. Let's go to that city. But they actually couldn't find any room to stay. They wander around and no one will take them in. Until one man finally takes them in. But when they're taken in, that goodness and that evil is surrounded, and you hear the voices of Sodom and Gomorrah echoed in the voices of the people of God, the children of Israel, demanding the exact same thing. And this woman is abused and destroyed. But it gets even darker. It gets even harder. Because the people who are on the inside respond not by leaving and not by decrying and not by pain and hurt and sorrow or trying to defend the innocent, but their response is more apathetic. It's more pragmatic. And there is outrage, and we will see that. There's outrage to this event, but it's an outrage that's confused. Horrible had come home to Israel. It was awful. They didn't know exactly what to do. But the man responsible, I know I'm being vague and it's an effort to not be crass. Let me be a little specific for time. The man who was responsible, the Levite, he was supposed to be a priest, who was responsible for that woman, was incensed. He was enraged. But the text doesn't say it was because of the abuse of the woman. It actually doesn't say because she was hurt, or because innocence was broken, or because of the situation of Israel. He was angry because it was his property and he was threatened. And so, in his anger and in his amount of indignation that someone would do that to him, he rallies the troops. Then all the people of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead, and the congregation assembled as one man that the Lord at Mizpah. So all the nations of Israel came because he sent out the most gruesome and awful calling card to revenge himself that you could possibly receive. And I won't talk about it, but let's just say he sent out to all the nations of Israel a sign and a symbol of brutality and blood and hurt that they could not ignore. And here's the line. Such a thing has never happened or been seen from the day that the people of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt, where they do human sacrifice, where they do awful things, and where they kill people. Such a thing hasn't been seen in Israel since they came out of that land. What do? And in outrage, the people of God assemble. But their response, they see awful, they see evilness, like we do around us, like we do in Syria, and sometimes like we do in our churches and in our homes, where we are. They see it, they see the chaos, and they see the confusion. But the problem is their response is driven by a man's outrage. And it's done in more confusion. And it's done to avenge, and it's done in haste, and it's done in ways that actually just makes the situation more complicated. I'll tell you a situation that happened. I'll tell you two stories from yesterday. In the hours that I was at the house, you can see my lack in parenting ability here. I was sitting watching football diligently, like I should have been. And I hear Harper crying. And of course, Gaddis is halfway toward me at this point saying, I think Harper is upset, and I can tell in his head, as he begins to talk about this, that he's trying to explain what happened, but I don't know if I'm getting the whole story. And I go into the bedroom where they had been jumping on the bed, and Harper was crying. She had been hurt. She was sad. Lainey was trying to explain something, but at the same time keep a very appropriate distance from the situation, even though she was there. And Gaddis was, I think, trying to explain how he was jumping over Harper, and maybe something had happened, but that was the case. The difficulty was, as I looked into the situation more and more and more, what you realize is no one's innocent in this situation. Harper was jumping on the bed, attacking people, and in moving around, I guess, breaking the rules that were agreed upon, she had been hurt. Gaddis risked her face by jumping over it, and in some senses landed on it. And Lainey, the oldest and most responsible, was watching and probably approving of everything that had gone on until things had gone wrong. And she's like, Dad, you should do something. And Dad was on the couch watching football. Not engaged, not watching, not protecting, not caring. There are things in the situation, the more you look into it, everyone is wrong. Everyone carries a piece of blame. Why is it so important to us? Why do we demand, when things happen, when we have outrage, when we see bad and chaos, we are so quick to want to assign blame and to point fingers and to demand justice. But the problem is that oftentimes that comes out of our outrage and our sense of being offended and our defense of what we want to control, instead of actually understanding and getting at all of the brokenness and all the pain and all the complication that leads to this amount of brokenness. I was reminded this week, some of the students are taking religious classes, and I had a discussion with some on the way to a fundraiser I was doing about Bill Maher. You know this Bill Maher? He's not one of my favorite folks. I'll just be honest. This is my confession. I think he gives half-truths and semi-intellectual arguments that really annoy me. And in doing so, he tries to attack a lot of things I love. Well, that's bad. There's badness there. There's a wrongness there in him. It is bad. But I was reminded that he's a person who's hurting too. And my attack on him and my uncharity towards him, the ways I talk about him, think about him, want his show to be canceled, that kind of thing, is complicated, right? But by grace, that's me. And his sin and my brokenness are related. They're the family. They're close. And so as I look at him and attack him, there's problems with me too. There's a great scene at the end of Romeo and Juliet after this awful thing has happened. Sorry if I spoiled it, guys. They're both gone. It's really bad. It's really sad. There's a tragedy. It's called a tragedy. It's actually called comedy like that. I don't understand Shakespeare. So the problem is, there's this awful thing that's happened. Okay? There's this terrible thing that's happened, and the families are still squabbling. They're like, well, if those darn Capulets, and if they did that, and they're kind of still squabbling. And there's this great part where the king comes out, and he begins to yell over the crowd. Do you remember what he yells? It's great. He says, all are punished. All are punished. And he uses it powerfully, because he's saying, no, I have failed. You, as their parents, have failed, and their friends. This tragedy, this death, this brokenness is traced back not to something you can point your finger at and box in easily and point in black and white, but you have all failed. And there's pain and hurt that has led to this. In our lives, Christians, when pain rears its head, when brokenness pops up, when the chaos is clear, our response, unlike Israel that begins to fight among itself, they go to war with themselves, and they even try to do it in a way that they think is right, but they're led by a high priest who is evil. They hurt one another. They kill one another trying to defend what is right. And they're actually more interested in punishing than what they're called to be as a nation, and that is light and good and hope. There is evil, there is justice, it should be done, there should be an outrage, but their outrage comes at a cost. And their response comes at a cost. Now I may be confusing you right now, but here's where I want to go with this. How you respond to evil and brokenness is equally as important as the brokenness and the evil and the justice that you want and long to be done. Israel attacked itself, attacked Benjamin, fought itself, and all are punished. People died, men died, a whole tribe of Israel was threatened. And then they took this strange vow. They all vowed, we're not going to support the men of Israel. They don't get wives. We're going to kill the wives. They're outraged over the abuse and the death of a woman, and they decide to kill women. and to abuse their own people. You can read the account. They actually tried to do it in a way that was right. They all even offer sacrifices to the Lord. And talking about warfare and hurt. And honestly, guys, I don't know what to do with some of this. Because the picture of the Lord in some ways is very confused. But I think it's intentional in this. If we're certain that we understand something about the Lord and it's very clear, and what it's leading us to is the hurt and the pain and the destruction of other people, we probably should think about it harder. That seems to be a confused response. Yes, I know we seek justice. Yes, I know we seek what is right, but I think with great pause, not with passivity, not with being paralyzed, but with great fearful dread, do I think we can begin to act in these ways. There's a time for these things. Was Israel doing it? The author actually doesn't say. But he does say what the result was. And that was more death, more pain, and more hurt for the house of the children of Israel. And that's in 20. But then they have a problem, right? Because they basically kill, and it's like at first as they wanted to eradicate this tribe of Benjamin, but then they all step back and go, but wait, Benjamin is of the tribe of Israel. We need to have 12 tribes in Israel. If we kill a branch, if we cut off our arm, that's not okay. How are we going to then provide wives for Israel? Their response is confused. They attack each other. There's a great line in Batman. It says, you start off with the right intentions. You start off, and it's talking about Harvey Dent, and he and Batman are having a conversation. I mean, it's Bruce Wayne, but it's Batman. Sorry. And he says, Harvey Dent, I think, is the one who says it. He says, well, what happens the further and further you go into the political process? The further and further you go into the darkness and engage in the complicatedness, he says, well, you either die or you live long enough, do you remember this line, to see yourself become the villain. That's foreboding. The men of Israel all gathered together for the first time in Judges. They'd always been split before that. And it looked on the surface, there were some positive things. It was an outrage over this act, this horrendous act, and to try to set things right, but they gathered together and they began to act in slaughter and death and the way they treated Benjamin. And now they were in a confused state, and they see themselves become the villain because they decide to kill other people, take their lives, and give them to the tribe of Benjamin. Rip them from their homes. The abuse of one woman leading to the abuse of many. Through the people of God. Do you hear this? I know, I'm sorry. I don't want to read it either. I don't want to face it either. And if right now what you're doing is doing the best you can to put distance between them and you, then you're missing the point. You're not far from this. I'm not far from this. Our churches are not far from this. Why? Because when we see outrage, when we see things we hate, and things that are wrong, things we should punish, things that do deserve justice, we respond in anger and aggression. But if we leave the methods of Jesus, if we leave the truth of Jesus, even if it's to accomplish good things and right things, then we have left the truth of what He Himself is and how He has given us truth Himself. Our confused response often does more damage than joy. We should have outrage. But what did they seek to preserve? Who was right? Who was wrong? All are punished. I hope, at least in some way, that leads you to verse 25 and 21. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Out of the chaos, out of the complication, out of the confusion and pain, there is this constant refrain. There was no king, there was no king, there was no king. Now, what's the irony in that? There was a king. There's always been a king. God very clearly told them when they came up out of Egypt, I am your God. I am your king. I will lead you. But they couldn't see the king. The people of God, the religious, didn't know that they were under the authority of a king. There are other authorities they pledged allegiances to. And it was those authorities they were seeking to uphold and demand. Now look, please don't hear me as an anarchist, but I'm going to challenge something real quick. What if you pledged allegiance to that you want to uphold? The people of Israel said, oh, we've got to keep 12 tribes in Israel. And really, what they were trying to do was kind of a right thing. It was a good thing. It wasn't wrong. There should be 12 tribes. They should be committed to that. But in order to uphold that, they were willing to destroy more people, to hurt more women. And things just get so muddled and wrong. I'm going to use a political example real quick. Hate me all you want. It's wrong for people to destroy innocent lives. But if you want to elect a person simply to preserve one aspect of God's truth and God's law, and you're willing to do that at any means, ignoring all the other things about that person or the person across the row, and if you believe that that person, simply because they take this one ethical stance, is the answer or the Savior, you're wrong. And I'm wrong. What do we pledge allegiance to? What is it that our hearts, what is it that we are called to follow? It is the King. And it's more complicated and painful. Probably more scary than we can imagine. We cannot promise to uphold any party. We cannot promise to uphold any club. We cannot promise to uphold any nation above our allegiance to the King. And in our defense and our confusion of wrong things, if we're defending that which is less, I'm not saying it's wrong to love our nation. I'm not saying it's wrong to defend the good things about us. I'm not saying it's wrong to take a stance. I'm asking you not to take a stance on a hill that is other than Jesus Christ, the great King. That's what I'm asking. Not to die on, and not to kill other people. And some of your soul and your heart today just wants this to be over. I don't blame you. I want this to be over. And there's a call that says, what can we do then? What is there any hope? Is there any joy? Are we just going to sit around? What do we do? What do you want me to do with that? I'll make some simpler applications, and then I want to give us one last call that I think is hopeful. One, admit the chaos. When I went to my children, and there's a lot of me that want to just be like, Gaddis, you're wrong, because you're the one that made contact with Harper's face. Therefore, you get the punishment, and I can go back to watching football. Do you know where that drive comes from? Have you ever done anything like that? Assess the situation quickly, get it solved, punish needs to be punished, so that you can do what? Get back with your previously scheduled broadcast. You do not have control of your life. And if you're trying to maintain control of your children, of your life, by simplicity and engaging in simple black and white absolute, if it's not absolute black and white, it's designated by God, then what all you're trying to maintain is whatever you pledge allegiance to, the control that you have. The maintenance of something, whether it be your own selfish agenda, the way how clean you think your house should be, how you think your children should turn out, or your family should turn out, how a church should be. It's a selfish agenda that you're actually defending and maintaining, not that of the King. And if you try to cut it like that, just so that you can quickly get back and to maintain control, we're just fooling ourselves. Admit the chaos. You don't have control. And you won't have control. Right now, a lot of you are like, well, maybe you. Admit it. Let go. Free yourself. Now, I'm not saying to go into anarchy. I'm saying to go into the hands of the King. Let go with your hands. And understand that the things you think you're holding on to so tight that you have to do to maintain and control are actually controlled and maintained by someone much more capable. It doesn't respond in confusion. It doesn't respond in anger or self-judgment. It's wrong and sinful, but responds in beauty and hope and glory. That's my application. Admit the chaos. And when we engage, and we do need to engage in the freedom and the love of Jesus Christ, because it is He, the King, that shows us how to do it. And it's He, the King, that makes it possible to do it. Now, this is why. There's so much evil. You're like, how would I even begin to answer the evil in Judges? You know how Jesus answers it? There's a woman who's thrown out so that the people inside don't die, and that their lives aren't lost. She's literally hurt and abused on their behalf. How does Jesus answer that? Jesus is the one who goes out, throws Himself to those who would hurt us and destroy us in order that we may be alive. That our life might be maintained, that we might have hope and goodness. The man was incensed because his property was taken from him, and there was wrong that was done, and there was injustice. Jesus satisfies both justice and mercy in the cross and in who He is as a person. You see, He's the only one, that's why I read in Romans, the just and the justifier. There was awfulness that had been done, it needed to be right, but how can that happen? And it is only through Jesus Christ that justice can be done, but then not continue the cycle of violence and death. Mercy comes. Justice and mercy comes in the person and work of Jesus Christ, and Him alone. And so what's the simplicity that I'm telling you? You're telling me about a bunch of chaos and confusion. I don't like it, and it's making me feel very, very paralyzed. Well, here's some simplicity, and that is Jesus Christ is your King and your answer. That's it. If you want simplicity, the Bible says, if you want something that's not confused, here's the non-confusion. He's the answer. His power, His mercy, His love, who He is, His provision. That's your answer. That's not confusing. That's not broken. It's not chaotic. So as your soul cries out for a king, a good king, how can the evil and the brokenness of Judges be undone? Only in the justice and the mercy of Jesus Christ, the true King. The people of Israel aren't finished making wrong decisions. Neither are you. And you're not finished trying to maintain your spheres of control. And you're not finished making bad decisions on how to even respond to bad decisions or bad situations. But you're held, you're loved, and you're near to the great King who's making all things new and bringing things to Himself, and that is Jesus Christ. How can we think about Syria? Is there any hope? Serious hope is your hope. That of the King. That of Jesus Christ. This morning, we come to this table, and it's a table set with the body and the blood of Jesus Christ.